What would you do if Jimin suddenly reached toward the crowd, looked directly at you, and handed you something you never expected to receive? Because during BTS's Day 1 concert at AT&T Stadium, one tiny gesture involving a young ARMY and a simple keychain turned into a moment that made the entire atmosphere feel completely different. For a few seconds, thousands of people weren't thinking about the stage lights, the choreography, or even the next song. They were watching Jimin. And more importantly, they were watching the little girl standing in front of him. The moment looked simple. But the reaction? Absolutely enormous. The stadium erupted, screams rolled through the crowd, and for one unforgettable instant, it felt like Jimin had taken a massive stadium filled with ARMY and reduced it to one deeply personal moment between an idol and a young fan. And what happened immediately after Jimin gave her the keychain is what made this moment even more unforgettable. So let's go back to the beginning. The lights inside AT&T Stadium had already transformed the enormous venue into something almost unreal. Thousands upon thousands of ARMY filled the seats, light sticks glowing across the stadium like a massive ocean of purple. Every direction you looked, there was movement. People were singing. People were screaming. Some were filming with their phones. Others were simply standing there, completely overwhelmed by the fact that they were finally seeing BTS in front of them. And somewhere inside that enormous crowd was a young girl who probably never imagined that the night would become one of the most unforgettable nights of her life. She was just another ARMY in a stadium filled with people who had traveled, waited, prepared, and dreamed about this moment. But then Jimin noticed her. And everything changed. At first, there was no dramatic announcement. No giant screen telling everyone what was happening. No warning that something emotional was about to unfold. It was simply Jimin interacting with the audience. And that is exactly why the moment hit so hard. Because the biggest memories from concerts are not always the moments with the biggest production. Sometimes they happen in the smallest spaces. A glance. A smile. A wave. A hand reaching toward the crowd. And sometimes, a tiny gift. As Jimin moved closer to the audience, the energy around him began to rise. You could almost feel the anticipation spreading from person to person. People leaned forward. Phones went higher. The screaming became louder. But nobody could have predicted what Jimin was about to do. Because there, among the sea of fans, was the little girl. And somehow, Jimin's attention found her. Imagine being that child for a moment. You are surrounded by thousands of people. The lights are shining everywhere. The music is filling the stadium. And suddenly, one of the biggest stars in the world is looking in your direction. Would you even know what to do? Would you wave? Would you freeze? Would you cry? Would you even believe it was really happening? That is what made the next few seconds so powerful. Jimin didn't simply acknowledge the crowd. He appeared to focus on this one young ARMY. And then came the gesture that sent the entire atmosphere into chaos. Jimin gave her a keychain. Just a keychain. Small. Simple. Something that could fit in the palm of a hand. But in that moment, it suddenly meant so much more. Because the value of a gift isn't always measured by its price. Sometimes it is measured by the memory attached to it. And for that little girl, this wasn't just a keychain anymore. It was connected forever to the night she saw BTS. The night she stood inside AT&T Stadium. The night Jimin noticed her. And the night he personally gave her something to remember the moment by. But then, the stadium reacted. And this is where everything became almost unbelievable. The second fans realized what had happened, the sound seemed to explode around them. Screams. Cheers. Shouts. People reacting with complete disbelief. It wasn't just excitement. There was something emotional inside the reaction. Because everyone understood what they were witnessing. Thousands of ARMY were watching a young fan experience a moment that many people dream about. And suddenly, the attention wasn't only on Jimin. It was on her. The little girl who had just received something directly from him. Think about that. There were thousands of people in that stadium. But for those few seconds, she had one of the most unforgettable interactions imaginable. And Jimin? He didn't need a long speech. He didn't need a dramatic announcement. He simply gave her the keychain. And somehow, that tiny action said everything. But here's what makes the moment even sweeter. Jimin has always been known by fans for the warmth he shows toward ARMY. Not just during performances, but in the small interactions that can easily disappear beneath the enormous scale of a stadium concert. A concert like this is massive. There are lights, cameras, security, music, choreography, thousands of moving people. Everything is carefully coordinated. And yet, moments like this can still feel completely human. One person sees another person. An idol sees a fan. A fan looks back. And for a few seconds, everything else becomes secondary. That is why this moment stood out. Because Jimin didn't need to turn it into something complicated. The simplicity made it beautiful. And if you were watching from the crowd, you could probably feel that emotional shift immediately. 1 second, everyone was screaming because of the performance. The next, they were screaming because something incredibly personal had just happened. The atmosphere changed from explosive to emotional, and then back to explosive again. But there was another detail that made people even more emotional. The recipient wasn't simply another adult fan standing in the crowd. It was a little girl. And suddenly, the entire scene felt different. Because children remember moments like this. Years from now, she may forget the exact sequence of songs. She may forget what color the stage lights were. She may not remember every word that was spoken. But she is far more likely to remember one thing. Jimin looked at me. Jimin gave me this. That is the kind of memory that stays. And imagine what that keychain might become over the years. Maybe it sits beside her bed. Maybe it hangs from her backpack. Maybe her family keeps it somewhere safe. Maybe every time she looks at it, she remembers the sound of tens of thousands of ARMY screaming around her. And maybe, years later, she will tell someone. Jimin gave this to me. And suddenly, a tiny object becomes a time capsule. A physical reminder of one extraordinary night. But the reaction from the crowd tells us something else. ARMY weren't jealous. They weren't angry that someone else received the gift. Instead, the overwhelming reaction seemed to be joy. People were celebrating her moment. And that is one of the most beautiful things about concert communities. When something wonderful happens to one person, an entire crowd can feel it. You can see it in the way people smile. You can hear it in the screams. You can feel it in the sudden excitement that travels through an entire section. One person's memory becomes everyone's memory. And that is exactly what happened here. But then, there was Jimin. After giving the keychain, the moment didn't immediately disappear. There was still that unmistakable connection between him and the audience. And perhaps that is what made everyone scream even louder. Because Jimin didn't treat the interaction like some random interruption. He allowed the moment to breathe. For those few seconds, it wasn't about the choreography. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about the massive production happening around him. It was simply a human interaction. And those moments are rare. Especially at a stadium of this size. Think about how enormous AT&T Stadium is. Now imagine filling that space with thousands of people and somehow creating a moment that feels intimate. That's difficult. But that's exactly why small gestures can become so powerful in a concert environment. The larger the stage becomes, the more meaningful the smallest human gesture can feel. And Jimin's keychain moment was proof of that. But let's pause for a second. Because there is something we often forget when watching idols perform. From the audience, we see celebrities. We see stars. We see people who appear larger than life. But from their perspective, the crowd is made up of individual people. Individual faces. Individual stories. Individual dreams. And sometimes, one of those faces catches their attention. Maybe Jimin saw the young girl's excitement. Maybe he noticed her reaction. Maybe the interaction simply happened naturally in that moment. Whatever the exact reason, the result was the same. A young ARMY walked away with a memory she will probably carry for a very long time. And the entire stadium witnessed it. That's why the reaction became so powerful. Because it wasn't just about receiving something. It was about being seen. And isn't that what many fans secretly hope for? Not necessarily to receive a gift. Not necessarily to stand directly beside their idol. But simply to feel, for one brief moment, that the person they have supported actually noticed them. That their presence mattered. That their voice mattered. That they weren't invisible in a crowd of thousands. And Jimin created that feeling in one simple gesture. A keychain. That's it. Yet somehow, it became a memory. And this is where the story becomes even more emotional. Imagine the little girl's perspective after the moment ended. The music continues. The concert moves forward. Jimin eventually turns back toward the stage. The crowd continues screaming. But she is still standing there holding the keychain. Maybe her hands are shaking. Maybe she is laughing. Maybe she's crying. Maybe she is looking at the person next to her as if asking, "Did that really just happen?" And the answer would be yes. It happened. The moment was real to her. And that is what makes live performances so special. You can replay a song. You can watch a performance again. You can save photographs. You can record videos. But you cannot recreate the exact feeling of standing there when something unexpected happens. You only get that moment once. And for this young ARMY, that moment now has a very specific shape. A stadium. Thousands of people. Jimin. And a small keychain. But there is another reason this moment resonated so strongly with viewers. It reminded people that kindness doesn't have to be enormous to be meaningful. Sometimes we think emotional moments need dramatic speeches. They don't. Sometimes the most powerful moments happen without a single profound sentence. A person notices you. They smile. They reach toward you. They give you something. And suddenly, you remember that moment for years. That is the emotional power behind what happened. And perhaps that's why the screams from the stadium felt so different. They weren't only screams of excitement. They were almost like a collective reaction of, "Look at what just happened. She got it. Jimin really gave it to her. How lucky is she?" For a few seconds, thousands of strangers were united by the same emotion. Pure happiness. And honestly, isn't that what concerts are supposed to create? A shared experience. A memory that everyone carries home. Something that makes you say, "I was there when that happened." And the little girl? She wasn't just there. She became part of the moment. But let's think about the keychain itself. Why does such a tiny object matter so much? Because objects can carry stories. A photograph can remind you of a place. A ticket can remind you of a concert. A bracelet can remind you of someone. And a keychain? It can become a daily reminder. Every time she sees it, she may remember that night. Maybe she'll attach it to her backpack. Maybe she'll keep it somewhere special. Maybe she won't even want to use it because she's afraid of losing it. Whatever she chooses, its meaning has already changed. Before the concert, it was simply a keychain. After that moment, it became a piece of a memory. And that is priceless. But perhaps the most beautiful part is that Jimin probably didn't need to know how important the object would become. He simply made a small gesture. And that's the thing about kindness. You don't always know the impact you're having. You may smile at someone for 2 seconds and completely change their day. You may encourage someone without realizing they needed it. You may give someone something small and create a memory they carry for years. You may never fully understand the impact. But the impact is still there. And that is why this moment deserves to be remembered. Not because a famous artist gave a fan a keychain, but because the moment represented something bigger. Connection, gratitude, and the incredible relationship between BTS and ARMY. A relationship built through music, years of memories, and countless moments shared across countries and generations. And inside that enormous relationship, sometimes there is one tiny moment that captures everything. This was one of those moments. But now imagine the sound one more time. The stadium is already loud. Then people realize what Jimin has done. The screaming rises. More phones come out. People point toward the girl. The energy spreads. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, one young ARMY is standing there holding a keychain from Jimin. For her, the stadium probably sounded deafening. But maybe, for a second, everything else disappeared. Maybe she wasn't thinking about the thousands of people around her. Maybe she wasn't thinking about the cameras. Maybe she wasn't thinking about what would happen next. Maybe she was simply thinking, Jimin gave this to me. And that's enough. That is the kind of moment people don't need to explain. You can feel it. You can see it on someone's face. You can hear it in the crowd. And you can understand why people became emotional watching it. Because underneath all the fame, the lights, the sold-out stadiums, and the enormous global success, there are still moments where everything becomes incredibly simple. An idol. A fan. A small gift. And a memory that lasts. That is what makes this moment so special. Not the size of the stadium. Not the number of people screaming. Not even the keychain itself. It's the meaning attached to it. And maybe that's the lesson we should take from this. We often wait for huge moments to make us happy. But sometimes happiness arrives in something tiny. A smile. A wave. A few seconds of eye contact. A surprise gesture. A small gift. Something that might look insignificant to someone else but means everything to you. For that young ARMY, the keychain may become one of those objects. Something she can look at years from now and instantly return to that night. The lights. The music. The screams. The excitement. And Jimin standing there. That's a memory nobody can take away. And maybe that's why the entire stadium reacted so strongly. Because everyone understood what they were witnessing. They weren't simply watching an idol give something to a fan. They were watching someone create a memory. And sometimes, the most unforgettable memories are the ones nobody planned. No elaborate setup. No warning. No script. Just a spontaneous moment that happens once. And then lives forever. So when people talk about BTS's Day 1 at AT&T Stadium, there will be countless things they could remember. The performances. The music. The lights. The choreography. The screaming crowd. But somewhere among all those massive moments, there will also be this tiny story. A young ARMY. A keychain. And Jimin. 3 simple elements. Yet somehow, together, they created one of the sweetest moments of the night. And if you were that little girl, how would you feel? Would you cry? Would you freeze? Would you immediately hug your family? Would you hold the keychain so tightly that you never wanted to let go? Because honestly, it's difficult to imagine a more unforgettable concert memory. And maybe that's exactly what Jimin gave her. Not just a keychain. A story. A memory. A moment she can tell for years. A moment that thousands of other ARMY can say they witnessed. And that's why the stadium erupted. Because sometimes, the biggest reaction comes from the smallest gesture. Jimin didn't need to give the entire crowd something. He didn't need to stop the concert for 10 minutes. He didn't need to make a huge announcement. One small act was enough. And perhaps that's why people are still talking about it. Because it felt genuine. It felt warm. It felt human. And in a world where everything can feel carefully planned, those unexpected moments can mean the most. So, if you were inside AT&T Stadium that night, you didn't just witness a concert. You witnessed a memory being created in real time. And if you were watching that young ARMY's reaction, you probably felt something too. That little smile. That disbelief. That excitement. That feeling of, this is really happening. And maybe that is the true magic of BTS. Not simply the ability to fill a stadium. Not simply the ability to make thousands of people scream. But the ability to make one person feel seen, while thousands of others celebrate alongside them. That's a powerful thing. And years from now, when that young ARMY looks back at that night, she may not remember every detail. But she will remember Jimin. She will remember the keychain. And she will remember the sound of an entire stadium exploding with happiness around her. That is a memory worth keeping. And maybe, in the end, that's what every concert is really about. Not just what happens on stage, but what happens between people. The moments that can't be rehearsed. The gestures that aren't announced. The memories that happen in the space between one song and the next. Because sometimes, the smallest moment becomes the biggest memory. And Jimin proved that with something as simple as a keychain. So now I want to know what you think. If Jimin gave you a small gift during a BTS concert, what would you do in that exact moment? Would you be able to stay calm? Or would you completely lose it like the rest of the stadium? And if this moment made you smile, share your reaction in the comments. Because somewhere out there, that little keychain may still be carrying the memory of one extraordinary night. A night when thousands of ARMY screamed together. But one young fan received a moment that belonged only to her. And Jimin? He may have only handed over a tiny keychain. But he gave her something much bigger. A memory she could carry with her. And sometimes, that's the greatest gift of all.